Good evening. I'd like to call the business meeting of the Portland Board of Public Education to order. It is Tuesday, March 19, 2019, and the school board is meeting in City Hall at City Hall and Council Chambers. May I please ask the superintendent to call the roll?
Yes, Mr. Chair. Mr. Atkinson?
Here.
Mr. Balfons?
Here.
Ms. Bondo?
Présente.
Ms. Figdor?
Here.
Ms. Davis?
Here.
Morioni?
Here.
Ms. Thompson? Ms. Trevorrow?
Here.
Mr. Inabanza?
Here.
Mr. Norris?
Here.
Ms. Power-Rakowski?
Here.
Mr. Samuntu? Mr. Abdirahman? And Chair Rodriguez.
Presente. And Ms. Thompson did tell me ahead of time that she'd be running a little bit late, but she'll join us shortly. Would everyone please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance? Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. For the report of the chair tonight, had just a couple of quick things I wanted to speak on. First of all, the board just held an executive session to discuss and decide the membership for, or rather the board representation for the negotiation team for the PEA unit contract. And the board has decided to have Ms. Figdor, Ms. Davis, and myself as the three board members that will sit in on those negotiations. A quick note, all of those negotiations always happen on executive sessions, and the discussions are private and not discussed outside of those meetings. And that's purposely done that way, and that's the understanding from the unit and from the board that that'll be the way we'll conduct ourselves. I'm thankful that we have board members that are willing to make the sacrifice in time and commit to being part of this team. This is one of the biggest contracts that we have to negotiate, and clearly it's a big undertaking for us to be part of it. So again, I'm thankful for the board's commitment to be part of that. Second, I just wanted to prep us up. Tonight's agenda on paper looks like it's a light one, not very many items, but clearly we have some big important items that we're going to discuss today. Of course, we have the budget presentation from the superintendent, which will probably take the bulk of our time. I'm excited about tonight's meeting. I think that this officially kicks off our budget season, and it kicks off, again, one of the most important parts of the responsibilities that the school board has to take on. So having said that, I'll try not to keep us here till late. Superintendent, we'll move to the students. Tonight we have a Casco Bay High School report. So we have Joseph Inabanza. Joseph, kick it off.
Good evening. I'm going to start with a quote by Nelson Mandela, and it's a very short quote. It says, education is the most powerful weapon that you can use to change the world. So during this time, at Casco Bay, it's pretty slow and sluggish, and it's that time of the year where like expeditions wind down and expeditions begin. And I just want to like talk about like my school, Casco Bay. It's an expeditionary learning school, which basically means we put our learning into practice. And I'll begin with the freshmen. They're beginning a new expedition called Question of Conscience, and it's all about bioethics, and it talks about the ethics that come into play when we talk about biomedics, when we talk about gene editing, and different aspects of the medical field, and whether it's ethical or not to remove genes that would impact generations to come. And from the freshman class as well, there have been 3 freshmen that were involved in the All-City Orchestra: Devin Abrams, Aiden Funkhauser, and Stella Huron. And from my class, the sophomore class, we started an expedition called Arc Towards Justice, an expedition about past civil rights movements that influence the current day Black Lives Matter. And that expedition is a very, very important expedition, I guess, in like every student's learning at Casco Bay, because it teaches you the reality of what's happening outside, and it makes you want to make a change in our community and our city as well. Sierra, who's also in my crew, like I said, Casco Bay is an expeditionary learning school, so we have crews, and in the crews you'd have a set of people that you're gonna go with until graduation. So you're basically gonna graduate with them, and you guys become family. And she qualified to represent Maine for the Under-16 Eastern Championships Maine team. And the team is all high school ages for Nordic skiing. The juniors are about to go on junior journey. It's during the time that we have intensives, and intensives is like a week where just students get to do some fun stuff, but at the same time put learning into practice and let loose before or after vacation. And the juniors go on junior journey, and they go and help out less privileged communities. And this year they're going to Millinocket, and they're going to help out. They're going to do community service, and instead of doing a documentary about their trip, they're going to have a skit. And it's probably, and I would like that everybody could go see the skit. And for last but not least, the seniors finish the senior expedition, so they get to do their own expedition and they get to run it. And I chose a girl named Sasha. Her expedition was about lack of diversity in teaching, and that was like a very important subject, because a lot of students talked about how not seeing diversity in their teaching has impacted teaching a lot, because it kind of feels as if, like, you know, it's now becoming a problem of they don't learn about people that look like them, and they also don't have people to teach them that look like them. And she works with students at Lyman Moore and King Middle School and all the middle schools at a young age, so that by the time they get to high school, they can already know like the importance of teaching. And there's like a whole lot of like areas, like there's lack of information about like how impactful teachers are. And in our society, you know, everybody wants to be doctors, everyone wants to be lawyers, everyone wants to be those big names, but, you know, it's teachers that actually bring out those big names. And just like her dealing with a lot of these young children on the lack of diversity in our teaching is a very impactful expedition. And that's what makes Casco is that we love to put our learning into practice, and every day we want to help out our community. So that's my school. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Inavanza. Always impressed and glad that we make space and time. Oh, go ahead, bring it. Give us more.
So I just recently joined Mr. Rodriguez and Ms. Otunu's book club. We're reading a book called The Hate You Give, and like I would just like invite everybody to come see the book club. It's on Thursdays at 3 o'clock, and all are invited. And it's just a great time to read books. Education is the most powerful weapon a man can use to change the world. Thank you.
Well said, sir. So I'm glad that you took me off my thought and you brought that up. I cannot say enough how impressive that young group of enthusiastic readers were in our first meeting, and I'm incredibly excited about continuing to meet with the students and discuss the book. It really is an opportunity for me to hear from these young people that are clearly going to be tomorrow's leaders, and I want to be in with them when they get there. So, Superintendent, I think it's your turn for the superintendent remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Today, I would like to begin by highlighting some of the great work that is happening in the Portland Public Schools. A couple of board meetings ago, we featured some of the exciting athletic and co-curricular accomplishments that are happening. And this week, I would like to recognize some of the outstanding work, particularly in the arts, that I've seen as I've gone around to schools. Last Friday, the Riverton School unveiled its welcome mural. The mural was developed by Riverton students to grace the previously empty brick wall that you see upon entering the school. The welcome mural is a mixed-media, three-dimensional piece of student work that greets visitors and welcomes them to Riverton in several of the many languages spoken in our schools. I would like to recognize the student artists, the administration and faculty, and especially art teacher Chad Hart. I would also like to mention the Portland High School Drama Club, which participated in the Regional One-Act Festival at Skowhegan High School over the weekend and had 5 cast members selected to the all-festival cast: Zoe Cheever, Connor Hall, Gina Larimore-Jones, Annie Martin, and Ed Sylvester for their performance of The Gentleman's Demise, written and directed by Alexandro Collins Rico, who received a judge's commendation for writing and directing. The PHS Drama Club will be performing the play at PHS sometime in the next few weeks. I would like to also congratulate Deering High School student Alan Manga for representing Deering well at this year's state competition of Poetry Out Loud. While Alan did not win this year, I think it's more inspirational yet that his efforts last year served to inspire this year's winner, Jao Victor, a student at Lewiston High School, and like Alan, an asylee, to pursue Poetry Out Loud. We wish Mr. Victor the best at the national competition, an opportunity that was made possible by Alan's courage, perseverance, and commitment. This week marks the beginning of MEA testing in our elementary and middle schools. Our teachers and staff have worked all year to help prepare our students for these tests, and I want to recognize their efforts. I would like to take this opportunity to thank parents for making sure that students come to school rested and ready to do their best. And best of luck to all of our students. While test scores are but one measure of what you know, I hope that you take this opportunity to do your best and show what you know. I have my own book club, not as cool as Mr. Rodriguez's, but I would like to invite members of the community to join me Friday at noon at the Portland Public Library for the second meeting of our Parent University Superintendent's Book Group, where we're reading Mary Piper's In the Middle of Everywhere. I would like to thank the Portland Public Library for hosting us again this year, and Executive Director for Communications and Community Partnerships, Grace Valenzuela, and her team for always thinking of great activities to help us engage our community. I think you know that the next best thing about my job after board meetings, it's a distant second, is talking to fifth graders. Today I had the opportunity to visit with fifth graders at Reiki Elementary School, and I learned that they don't know when the last day of school is, and that that's the most important thing that they wanted to hear from their superintendent. So I want to let Finn, Mina, Kevin, and I know Douglas, and I'm missing some other kids, that the last projected day of school for students is Friday, June 14th, and that will be a half day for students, and Monday, June 17th is the last day for staff. We can't have any more snow days because Mina has a flight to catch on Tuesday. So we absolutely are done with snow days for the year. Knock on wood, everybody, and that concludes my report.
Yeah, we all feel like the superintendent jinxed it really bad. Report of the Secretary, consideration and action to approve the minutes from the meeting of March 5th, 2019. Is there a motion? Ms. Bondo, second by Ms. Morioni. Any questions on the motion? Ms. Victor?
I have 2 questions. One is a correction. So in the final policy that we passed on pre-K, the second bullet does not match the policy we passed. So the second bullet, we made a change at the very end, and it should read, the additional classrooms will be staffed with Portland Public School teachers and education technicians and located in community partner sites or other sites as appropriate or available. So it's just the beginning of that sentence. We clarified because we made the first bullet at least 5. We had to then adapt this bullet, and that's just not reflected in the minutes. So the change would be the additional classrooms will be staffed, just as the introduction to the sentence.
Excellent. And that does match what the board approved, so I feel like that we can pass that as a friendly amendment to the minutes. Any other questions? Ms. Victor?
And my other second issue is that my understanding is we follow Robert's rules in taking these minutes, and as a result, we should be noting which board members voted in the minority on individual votes. And right now, these minutes and our minutes recently have only indicated the actual votes. So I wanted to clarify that, at least moving forward, we could indicate which members voted in the minority. I think it's critical for transparency, so members of the public who aren't able to attend our meetings or watch the proceedings online are able to know how individual members voted.
And that is correct, and we will make those changes.
Thank you.
Excellent. Any other questions on the motion? Seeing none, any board discussion, any public comment on the motion? Seeing none, any board discussion? Seeing none. So all those in favor of approving the minutes from the meeting of March 5th, 2019 with a friendly amendment, as Ms. Victor explained, please indicate. It is unanimous with the students voting in favor as well. Thank you. For the report of the committees, we'll start with Curriculum Committee, Ms. Morioni. Excuse me, Mr. Boffins, my bad.
I'll take this one. So the next Curriculum Committee is Tuesday, March 26 at 5 p.m. And that's all.
Thank you. Operations Committee.
Ms. Thompson is not here, so I will report for her. We met actually last night, and we had a couple of significant topics on the agenda. The first was beginning to revisit and potentially revise the energy and sustainability policies. Those are two separate and distinct policies. We had student board member John Del Norris joined us, as well as 2 Portland High School teachers who, Ms. Braceras and Ms. Martin, who are the leaders of the Environmental Club at Portland High School. We were undertaking those topics because, as you know, there is significant interest in energy in the student body around moving towards renewable sources of energy, and so that was part of our conversation. It was a very productive conversation. I think I got very solid guidance around what to do for our next meeting, and so we will proceed from there. Then we also did a bit of a level set around our transportation department. The committee had the opportunity to meet our interim director, Eric Wood, as well as learn about some of his efforts over the past couple of months to fully staff us up, some of the innovative things that he's tried to do to be able to get us to a place where we've been able to discontinue all of the non-Portland Public School routes that we were running. And then we also, with the help of the committee, sort of set expectations for some of the research that we need to do as a staff to prepare us for significant conversations around expanding transportation to pre-kindergarten as directed by the board's resolution at the last meeting, and also to explore the possibility of later start times for our secondary students. So those are the issues that are in front of the Operations Committee, and that was it.
Thank you, Superintendent. Finance and Personnel, Ms. Trevorrow.
Thank you, Chair. The Finance Committee met last Thursday, and we got a preview of what we'll be looking at tonight for the budget. We'll be meeting on Thursday at 6 o'clock at Central Office to receive the budget from this board and to take our first look at it. And then we'll be meeting Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday of next week. Thursday will be Wednesday will be the joint Finance Committee meeting. All of those are, 6 o'clock on Tuesday, 5:30 at City Hall on Wednesday, and 6 o'clock on Thursday. And we'll be voting, hopefully, out the budget on Thursday next week and returning it back to the board in time for April 2nd.
Thank you. Policy and Legislative Committee, Ms. Davis.
The Policy Committee did not meet this month, and we're going to skip to our next meeting. I forget. I think we're
April 9th.
Yep. We had several conflicts. But the legislative part of our committee has been meeting regularly with the city's legislative committee. We met this Monday, we meet again next Monday, and the purpose of those meetings is we meet with the city's lobbyists, legislative representation, occasionally with the legislative delegation. We review the laws as they're being printed and look at whether or not that's something that we want to support, whether it's something we are in opposition to, whether it's something that we just want to track for outcome purposes, whether or not we're going to take a very active role of going up and actually testifying on some bills. And so we sort of go through each of them and look at them. There's still a few more bills to be printed, but it's beginning to slow down. It's been a busy session. And it's pretty much the board should be now getting a packet of the listing of bills as they're printed, and certainly if anybody has questions or if a member of the public has questions about a particular bill and where the school board or the Maine Municipal Association may be coming down on that particular bill, please feel free to get in contact with the superintendent or with me. As the legislative season begins to go on, they'll be taking a lot of bills that are similar and, holding hearings and essentially condensing them down. And some bills will some bills are beginning to drop by the wayside. Some bills will begin to get, to gather some speed. Some will get consolidated with other like bills. So we're watching that process very carefully and very collaboratively with the city, which I'm glad to report.
Thank you, Ms. Davis. Public Affairs, Mr. Atkinson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We held a public forum on budget priorities a few weeks ago, and that went well. We'll be talking enough about the budget this evening, I think. We also have coming up another Coffee with Constituents event at 8 a.m. at Rwanda Bean on Stevens Avenue. That's March 27th at 8 a.m. And our next committee meeting will be on April 3rd at 5:30 p.m. at the Central District Office. Thank you.
Thank you. Appointments Committee, Ms. Morioni.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The Appointments Committee met last month, and what we worked on was drafting a new policy, BCF, advisory panels or committees to the Board of Public Education, and a procedure, BCF-R, regulations of panels or advisory committees to the Board of Public Education. So right now, where we are in the process of that is we had quite a few edits of the work we had previously looked at, and the committee members are reviewing those edits and should hopefully have those finished by the end of this week. And then the next thing that's going to happen is to send both of these to Drummond and Woodsum for their review. And then I'm hopeful that by early next month, if possible, we'll be able to have at least a first read on the policy and procedures for the board. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other committee or member concerns? If None. I'll just add that the the next Parent University event is the second part of the Kids See Color, Talking to Kids About Race. It's going to take place on Saturday, March 23rd, from 1 to 3 p.m. at East End Community School. The first session of this event took place last month, I think, and the attendance was amazing. There were so many folks in the community that showed up for that. So this is clearly a topic that has a lot of interest from the community, and I'm really grateful again for the work that our staff, that Grace Valenzuela, and the people that put together Parent U events have done, and again how much involvement there is from the community. So I hope to see as many people there as we had last time. Thank you. For the consent items, will the superintendent please speak?
Yes, Mr. Chair, under Board Policy KCD, the school board accepts by unanimous consent contributions made to the school district. As required by that policy, all of the donations are listed in the board memo accompanying this item, and as has been the practice, each donor will receive a written contribution acknowledgement, expressing our heartfelt gratitude as well as for their tax purposes. And I would like to thank the many generous contributors to the Portland Public Schools who have made donations of durable goods, goods of substantial value and historical or commemorative significance. And the contributors are, and I'm sorry, I'm going to have to get close to be able to read this. Riverton Elementary School received a refrigerator to store fresh food for their food backpack program from Anne Marie Gribben Bouchard of Portland. Cliff Island received technology upgrades that include a 63-inch Samsung TV and Apple TV to provide screen sharing between teachers and student devices. Two iPads and cases, a MacBook Air with case, 3 years of Apple Care and Apple Pencil, and an HDMI cable. And this is from the Cliff Island Memorial Fund of Cliff Island, and I know we have representatives here from the Memorial Fund, so thank you very much for your generosity with our school. And Reiki Elementary School received the following: vacation kits that include a book, markers, pencils, activity books, and stickers for all K-3 students from Bernstein Schur of Portland, snacks for classrooms, and 3 boxes of new books from Maine Medical Center, 3rd grade Portland unit exploring the ocean from Bug Light Charitable Foundation of Portland, and coats, hats, mittens, scarves, and books from Maine Nephrology of Portland. So again, thank you very much to all of our generous contributors.
Thank you, Superintendent. There are no board focus on educational issues this evening, so moving on to old business. Consideration and action to approve the 2019-2020 school calendar. Is there a motion? Ms. Davis, second by Ms. Morioni. Will the superintendent please speak to the motion?
Yes, Mr. Chair. Tonight, we're asking you to approve the 2019-2020 school calendar. I would like to point out a couple of important elements about that calendar are significant changes. First, the calendar was developed in cooperation with our Portland Arts and Technology High School sending districts to conform to the Department of Education requirements that the districts in the cooperative agreement have no more than 5 dissimilar days. Second, this calendar is largely built on the one from this school year. It has 176 student attendance days and 183 teacher days. The school year begins after Labor Day for students, but teachers are on site for 4 days before the start of the school year. One change in this year's calendar is that we are proposing to begin our early release Wednesdays, the first Wednesday of the school year, and go through the last week of the school year. Previously, we did not start until the last week in September, and we ended at the end of May. This will provide additional time for teacher and administrator and team planning and professional learning, and will also make for more consistency for families with early release days.
Thank you, Superintendent. Are there any questions on the motion? Seeing none. Oh, I'm sorry, Ms. Davis, please.
Just one, and it's not really on the, it looks like part of it is upcoming board meetings, and on May 7th, it lists us as being in City Hall, but I've seen other lists that have that date on Peaks Island, so I just wanted to make sure that whichever is right, that we know what it is and that it's correct on this.
Got it. Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Ms.
Is it
Davis.
Peaks Island?
I don't know.
We don't know.
I don't know.
Okay.
Janet would know, but I don't, so.
Any other questions? Seeing none, is there any public comment on the motion? Okay, please come up to the podium, state your name, address, and you'll have 3 minutes to address the board.
Stephen Sharp for Cumberland Avenue. First, I hope you're not meeting on Peaks Island on May 7th during your budget season. That would be a very poor time to have a meeting out on Peaks Island. As in terms of the budget is concerned, the school calendar, I'm sorry, school calendar is concerned, I have a couple of questions. First, I want to commend you for starting the school year after Labor Day. School should never start before Labor Day for students. And I'm glad the school department has decided that that's the way it should happen. But I do question a couple things. October 14th, November 27th, and April 10th are slash days, which basically is an additional either Wednesday or Friday vacation day for students. And I'm at a loss as to why we need to give them additional days off. I quite frankly don't think we even need to give students days off on October 14th, November 11th, or January 20th. They're all days that should be used for teaching. They should be used for teaching the specific subjects that relate to those holidays, and would encourage the board to move those into all 7 of those days, I think I added up just now, into classroom days and increase the learning ability of the students of Portland. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment?
Good evening. My name is David Hopkinson of 9 Grafton Street. Although probably not the time for tonight, I would suggest that we look at the number of school days that we have. We took 2 school days away last year, and we had a fantastic 2-day conference for teachers in the middle of the summer, which I've been assured should be occurring in the next cycle as well, so we haven't lost the use of those 2 days. I understand part of the reason for last year for those 2 days was $400,000 that could be used for the teacher development, and I do appreciate that the board is working on pre-K as an extra entire year that students will spend in school, but I do think as we move forward we should look at the number of school days that we have and at least get back to the 178 that we had before the financial issue last year, and possibly look at 180 days or more as other states, I believe one of them, even Illinois, is at 190. And just something to think about. I know that's not for tonight, but thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment? Okay, seeing none, is there any board discussion on the motion? Mr. Atkinson?
I just want to voice similar concern to Mr. Hopkinson around the 2 days that are the 2 days less in this calendar versus last year. I think that decision was made in a very difficult situation last year, and I'm hoping that we can at least look at the numbers and what it might look like to get up to 178 like we had last year, or even 180 where we were several years ago. And if we can look at that as part of our Finance Committee deliberations around the budget this year, that would be much appreciated. Thanks.
Ms. Bigdor?
I want to echo Mr. Atkinson's concerns about shortening the school year. Last year, the board shortened the school year solely because of budget challenges, and yet that shortened year is now baked into this calendar for next year. I don't think that's the way that we should be making decisions. Those 2 extra school days are critical. I want to keep the Summer Institute, and so would see the Summer Institute continuing. I see a huge value in that and think we need to move towards additional days of professional development, so certainly building off what's in there now, but also adding those 2 extra days back and potentially more, as others have alluded to. Thank you.
Any other discussion? Ms. Morioni, please.
I guess I'm not quite clear on why October 11th is a day off. I know it's not question time right now, but it's not a holiday, nor maybe it's regarding the paths, sending schools. I'm seeing yes, that's an issue.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying.
Superintendent, do you mind briefly clarifying that? Because I know it was part of the question, but I think it is worth just saying a couple of things about
So
why
I did mention that we are required to match up to no more than 5 days that are dissimilar between the, 14 sending schools, 16 sending school districts. So it is quite a challenge, and there are, just every district has its customs and routines, and so there are some districts that have that as a long weekend for students, a fall break, and so that tends to be a professional development day for staff, and then the students have a 4-day weekend. So I think that that's the, our accommodation there is that it's not built into our calendar at all, so, kids will not attend in Portland either, and that way it's a day that is not dissimilar. And that's the same concept that applies to the April day before April break. That is also, in many districts, a professional development day for staff, and so that is the idea behind that. I'm not quite sure the Wednesday before Thanksgiving where that arose, but it is very commonly used in school districts. So.
Thank you, Superintendent. Any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll say that I agree with the sentiment expressed about the 2 student days that we eliminated last year. That I would like for there to be an effort to put them back on our calendar. I will also say that to add days just to add days is really not part of our mission here. I think that the purpose of professional development is critical for those days to be meaningful. I always make the comparison of my professional career as a therapist, that the time that I spend in case conference with the other clinicians that take care of the patients that we work with, that's incredibly valuable time, and at times what we discuss in those case conference and the way that we prepare to deal with our patients makes that interaction with the patient much more effective, and it really is what carries over the plan of care. And so again, to add days simply to say that we added days is probably not what anybody has in mind, but really to do it in a really effective way and to support our teachers through professional development and other ways that we can have them better prepared to be valuable instructional days. I think that's what this board ultimately would want to support. So again, having said all that, all those in favor of approving the 2019-2020 school calendar, please indicate. It is unanimous with the students voting in favor as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Excuse me. New business. Consideration and action to accept the Enrollment and Facilities Study Commission final recommendation and draft final report, and recommend to the Finance Committee for inclusion as backup materials during the FY 2019-2020 budget deliberations. Is there a motion? Ms. Trevorrow, second by Mr. Balfans. Thank you. Will the superintendent please speak to the motion?
Yes, Mr. Rodriguez. Today we have a report from the Enrollment and Facility Study Commission. The Enrollment and Facility Study Commission was convened this fall in response to concern about the projected decrease in state funding brought on by the current state school funding formula and Portland's skyrocketing valuation. It came on the heels of a challenging 2019 budget process where we were, as you recall, asked to look for ways to reduce costs. The Commission was charged with looking for efficiencies in our use of facilities across the entire spectrum of facilities in the district. The board's charge included looking at school consolidations, closures, and reconfigurations. The charge asked the Commission to look at the objective data to determine what might be possible. To assist in that process, the board approved a contract with Davis Demographics out of California to assist the Commission with the collection and analysis of data on enrollment and facility use. Today, Commission Chair Peter Eglinton and John Thomas, Principal at Thomas and Williamson Program Management, John, in Pittsburgh, they are the prime subcontractor to Davis Demographics on the facility portion of the study, are here to provide an overview of the Commission's work and discuss their formal recommendation to the board. So, John?
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to try to condense about 4 months' worth of discussions and analysis into 20 minutes to a half an hour, and hopefully I'll come away having left you with a lot of food for thought, understanding not only how we approach this, how we work together with the Commission, but ultimately how we came to the result that we did. So our understanding of what you all expected from us was to consider ways to right-size the district. People hear that term all the time. What that term means to us is that you're taking the spatial capabilities that you have and making them dovetail to fit uniquely with the loading conditions that you have. How many students are coming in? What grades are they in? What kinds of classes are they taking? Where are they coming from? How do we develop facilities to make and how do we arrange facilities to fit those needs coming in? Secondly, looking secondarily at the programming options that may result, and you'll see one option, actually one group of options tonight, that there was a supplemental consideration within that option where the Commission looked at a programmatic change, a very subtle programmatic change, but nevertheless a programmatic change. Thirdly, looking at all aspects of the pre-K program that you have here, not just looking at one portion of it. I know early on in the study, some of the reporters picked up on the fact that we looked at the elementary enrollment and the elementary capacity, and we said you're operating at a level that is really quite good, that you aren't wasting space, you aren't overloading schools, and I think at that point there was a little bit of a shift where people started thinking, oh, well, let's not look at the elementary schools anymore, let's just look at the secondary. Want to assure you we kept that all in play, and the Commission kept on looking at elementary to see if there was a way to make that better as well. Considering the grade level configuration changes. So right now you have a pre-K and you're through 5, and I guess just recently you're talking about having more pre in there, more pre-kindergarten in your mix. You have your 6 through 8 middle schools and your 9 through 12 high schools. What was communicated to us was you weren't absolutely married to that you were willing to consider options for reorganizing your grade level structure to see if that could lead to cost reductions. Next, looking at school consolidations, closures, that was right up front. Sometimes we get into these studies and people really want to shy away from the closures because they become difficult to deal with. The closures were on the table as a possible outcome. And also to consider the non-educational, directly educational buildings, the admin, the transportation facility, food service operations, adult ed. And I think here the charge was look and see what you can do with the educational facilities, the schools themselves, to see if there's some type of synergy that might create the opportunity to get out of lease space, as an example. Final product expectations. To develop a set of recommendations for the board consistent with what I just showed you on the previous slide, and reflecting key considerations presented to the commission from the initial surveys that were conducted, the considerable engagement that we all had in the commission meetings, and I guess most key among those considerations, the topic that seemed to keep floating to the top was looking for cost reductions. Based on the review and analysis of data, what was that data that we were analyzing? 4 or 5 main categories. The space availability, the programming, when I say programming, how the space is used. For instance, when we looked at the high schools, we looked at them on a departmental level, because it wasn't good enough just to look and see if we had enough overall space available in the school. We needed to make sure we had the right kind of space. If you have twice as many general purpose lecture classrooms as you need, that doesn't do you much good when you have half as many laboratory spaces that you need. So you do have to look at it at the program level. Another data set was the space utilization. As I indicated earlier, there was some initial aha moments that came with the first publishing of our elementary capacity study, where it's quite simple. It's a student-centered arrangement where you're loading a certain number of kids into each classroom, and that's consistent among the grades at the elementary levels. That's in strong contrast to what you see at a middle school or a high school. At the middle school or a high school, you're going to see that the capacity is really a function of how you're scheduling the school, because the students are no longer the schedule is no longer student-centered, it's subject-centered. So it's a matter of taking the scheduling load that's coming in for each student that has to take certain types of classes and meshing those all together so that you end up with a smooth running machine. Another data set that we looked at, and this was primarily my project colleagues from Davis Demographics, looking at the changes in enrollment. What was changing at each grade level? Where was it changing per the enrollment zones? Were there some enrollment zones that were growing, some that were shrinking, some staying the same? What was the overall net effect of that? And then how did that play against the backdrop of your facility capacity? And then I just want to reemphasize as a matter of scheduling, not just the scheduling in and of itself, but the mode of the scheduling. one of the things that I think were revealed to the commission that they might not have thought about before was when you looked at the scheduling of the high schools, for instance, where it's a purely subject-centered schedule. You compare that with the middle school scheduling, where it's groups of students in teams. There was a huge difference in the efficiency of the schools based on whether they were middle schools or junior highs. Next bullet point, that this would be based on our analysis and our considerations. And I think one of the other contributions I think we made was that, and I can thank all of you for this, is that you had a commission that was there working with us, and they were really getting into the details with us. So we would collect all the data, analyze it, present it, review it with your commission. Your commission would take it in, ask the questions. We'd give them a little bit more insight into how things were working. And I think that will form a little bit of a legacy for you, in that you'll be able to rely on not only the information that we've published. There's a lot of information that's published that's on your website, but also there's now a local understanding of how those options can work for you in the future. And then finally, after we got through the whole analysis and presented the information to the commission, they vetted that in public, and I think there was some very open discussion that took place. I want to review the process with you quickly. So the first blue block on the left, the formation of the commission, took place in September. You guys didn't really see us getting in front of the commission until late November, early December. While that period was occurring, the school district administration was in a huge data collection effort. So there was a good 2.5, 3 months of data collection, and I think it's always helpful to have somebody come in and do an audit of sorts to look at all the information that you have available for all the parameters I discussed on the previous slide. There were some instances where we uncovered flaws in the data that I think y'all thought things were working a certain way, and they weren't. So it was very helpful to just collect the data and validate it. The first step, to the second block from the left, the elementary capacity analysis. We looked at the capacity of each school and looked at the effect of having the district-wide special ed programs that would displace capacity in some schools. We then looked at the enrollment that was coming into each school and gave you the percent utilization that was happening at each elementary school, and then the overall aggregate percent utilization. 78%, I believe it was, which is really quite good. I normally, if I'm kind of starting from scratch and trying to help somebody rearrange their school system, will come up with a target of 85%. That's a very common metric that we use. So being at 78% with a number of smaller elementary schools, pre-K through 5, I thought was really quite good. The secondary capacity analysis, again, had to get in a little bit deeper. It wasn't just a matter of counting the number of students per classroom. It was counting the number of students per classroom each period in certain types of space, and that's what makes it tougher. Makes it tougher on the high school principals and the middle school principals to make their school run as smoothly as the elementary schools, because there's going to be a lot more change that takes place each period, and there's a whole new dimension with having to split the kids up and multiplex them back together into their own individual programs. The secondary capacity was much lower than what we normally see. And I do think that that's a lot of it is that your schools were sized once for a much larger student body. And I know that I was contacted by some of the local media, and they were somewhat alarmed about the degree to which the secondary schools were loaded, that they were loaded so low. That doesn't really present itself to me as being something that's wasting money. You always have I call it the lock the door option, that if you have a whole wing of rooms in a school that aren't needed, you can always rearrange your kids to have them over in the bulk of the school that is needed, and then you can reallocate your staff into that needed section of the school. So just looking at the capacity metric in and of itself isn't wasteful. I think that if you're going to look to improving that, it comes as a function of creating an opportunity where you have a more streamlined schedule, and some of those alternatives did show up in the options that I'll review with you. As a parallel process, the fourth block from the left, the demographic study, our partners, Davis Demographics, they geocoded the location of every student in the school, or took the geocoding that you already had for your transportation and validated it, sorted through it, and then made projections to show what the enrollment would be in the following 7 years. They also went in and worked with the housing department to see what new housing developments were in the development and in various stages of development, either being constructed, being planned, or being commissioned. And they developed various statistics to forecast how many students would come out of those individual housing plans. That gave you your future loading. So on all of the blocks to the left, we have the capacities, and at this point, at this juncture, we have the loading that's coming in, that we hope that the capacity can support this enrollment that's coming. And the answer is that it did. Formulation of options. So after giving everybody the insight through these first 3 steps, and let's not forget that there was a survey that you conducted really at the very beginning of the process. When everybody got an understanding and saw how things were working, they were educated into the ways of facility planning. The commission broke up into 3 groups, and each group came up with a reconfiguration option. In one case, the one group said, we can't really come up with anything by ourselves, but we'd like the planner and the administration to help us come up with one. So that's how that option came about. And then I also threw another option in myself. The next step to the right was to analyze those options. So we went from a very conceptual level with just some overall option mission statements, and we broke them down. We did floor plans for each option and each version of each option. We came up with staffing plans that would go along with those options, and then we're able to take the staffing plans and turn that into a potential cost reduction, or in some cases, a cost increase to implement that option. So, as I discussed before, when we had something as simple as an elementary school, yeah, you're putting 20 or 22 kids in a classroom. That's pretty straightforward. When we get into the secondary schools, it called for us to go in and produce essentially a hypothetical schedule that the kids would follow, so that we knew how many rooms were needed and how many teachers were needed to carry out your plan. From there, information went back to the information we produced along with your administration, went back to the commission, and they went through it and came up with their recommendation. I'm just going to put this up here so you can compare and contrast there's really 5 options here, because there's a 1A and a 1B, but let me move into the next slide where I actually have the details of 1A. So this option is a K-12 expeditionary learning school. The remaining 10 through 12th graders would go to another high school location. They didn't decide whether it would be Deering or Portland or Casco Bay. There would be 3 6 through 9 middle schools. The adult education would move to Casco Bay. The central office would move to an open middle school along with Bayside. And this option potentially closed 1 middle school, an elementary school, and then the central office and the adult education relocate. And you can see in the block plan down to the left the grade levels of each building and how this change takes place. The staff utilization here is just a very minor increase. So we're seeing an increase in option A. A 5-person increase in staff yielded an increase of over $1 million. So this did not save money. Let's go to 1B. So same theme that was presented by the commission. However, this one we changed to 2 grade 6 through 9 junior high schools, and just that simple change flipped the switch from increased costs over to savings of $2 million. So sometimes you can study these by yourself and look at 1A and 1B. So the concept was basically the same in both, but that switch from the 6 through 9 middle schools, where we were able to schedule them as junior highs, we went to a subject-centered scheduling as opposed to a student-centered scheduling, and that resulted in a $2 million savings. Option 2, this one was to take to have one 10 through 12 high school. Casco Bay would remain as a 9 through 12. You would have one 7 through 9 middle school at the other high school site, approximately 1,400 students, 2 5-6 buildings, presumably at the middle schools, 500 students each, and then the elementary grades would drop down to pre-K through 4. This would potentially close one elementary school, removing 500 fifth graders, and this would require redistricting. This would also have the central office and the adult education relocating to the closed middle school. So let's look at how this one stacked up. This one was the biggest saver. So this had a staff reduction of almost, with the low estimate of, and we're using the low estimates on all of these, of almost 30 teachers for a savings of almost $2.8 million per year. And let me just say real quickly, when we look at the difference between the low estimate and the high estimate. Within our study, we had 4 variations of your staffing plans. The version A was the 25 students per section with each teacher getting their own classroom. Version B was 25 students per section with collegiate scheduling, where the teachers don't get their own classroom, they move around and share classrooms. C was an average of, or a maximum of 28 students per section. Every teacher gets their own room. And then D was 28 students maximum per section with collegiate scheduling. So within that range, you could see how if you go from 25 per section, one teacher having their own classroom, up to sharing classrooms at 28, you could really jump up the savings. Option 3, this one is 1 10 through 12 high school. Casco Bay would remain 9 through 12. That seems to be a fairly common theme. 1 8 through 9 middle school. 2 6 through 7 buildings, 500 each. The elementary remains the same or is redistricted to even out the enrollment. Includes pre-K to the fullest extent possible. Closes the adult education, the central office and adult education relocate to the middle school along with Bayside. You can see how that looks in the block diagram. This one has a cost savings of almost $800,000 per year. And then finally, this was one that I threw in for good measure, mainly because it's one that I have done numerous times in the past for other districts quite successfully, and it's to keep all your existing schools in play, but change the grade levels of them. And the best place to look at this is down at the block diagram on the right side. You see how the schools become put into groups of 2, with Ocean Avenue and Presumpscot, Rowe and Longfellow, Lyseth and Riverton, East End and Reiki, and then the island schools, they stay the same. And the concept here is that you're taking you're taking one of the 2 in the group and you're making it into the primary school, and you're making the other into the intermediate elementary. In each case, I took the enrollment zones were right next to each other, and I tried to take the school that was the smallest and make it into the intermediate so that I could take advantage of having the higher section capacities at that school. So this keeps all the schools operating that you have, changes the way they're operating, and saves you $1 million per year. And at this point, I'm going to hand this over to the head of the commission, Mr. Peter Eglinton.
Thank you for having us here today. Thank you, John, for the overview of our work. I'm tired just listening to it again. There was a lot of material, and I want to thank the members of the commission for turning out, and paying attention, and really delving into some potentially difficult areas. It's a testament to the seriousness that we had such a mix of community members, teachers, administrators, and staff come together, identify some fairly challenging options, and put forward for public comment the one that was probably the most challenging to implement, but would save the most money. And was all of the options were developed based on models that are used elsewhere. We weren't making them up, but it became very clear that any of these options would be very difficult, and but we persevered in our discussions. And I'd like to, as my statement, I'd like to read the statement that we approved as a commission. It was developed by Commission members Ben Grant, Councilor Kim Cook, and David Brenneman. But the Commission as a whole voted for this statement unanimously. So I'd like to read that. It would only take me about a minute or two. The Enrollment and Facilities Study Commission was charged with evaluating the most effective and efficient use of our school buildings. The consultant provided relevant data indicating a steady K-12 student population over the past decade and in future projections, but also showed some facility inefficiencies. The Commission was asked to develop new ideas for potential reconfigurations that would use Portland's existing space more efficiently. The exercise of trying to conceive of new configurations at a single meeting and the resulting analysis and discussion raised questions that extended beyond the scope of the Commission's charge. Facility changes that impact educational programming need to be considered in light of education policy and district goals, as well as budgetary issues. For this reason, we do not recommend that the school board focus on any specific reconfigurations at this time. Rather, we recommend that the school board and city council consider the following issues in the larger context of Portland's budget and educational needs, and work to develop both a short-term and long-term plan that will ensure both efficient and high-quality education in Portland. It is imperative, number one, it is imperative that Portland's schools run as efficiently as practicable in order to ensure Portland offers a high-quality educational experience for students. Number two, the superintendent and school board have expressed a desire to expand and enhance educational programs and services in the future, which, if approved, require additional state and local tax dollars to implement. I guess you'll hear a little bit more about that later. While efficiency is suboptimal at some schools, the study commission did not uncover any obvious or easy reconfigurations that would improve efficiency without significant educational programming changes. Number four, in the near term, the school board and school administration should seriously evaluate filling excess space in school buildings with programs or offices that currently exist outside of the elementary, middle, and high school buildings, in particular school administrative offices and Portland adult education. Any future consideration to reconfigure educational programming should not be done hastily or by a group solely charged with looking at demographic and efficiency data. Major shifts in grade configuration involves educational, programming, and transportation considerations that went beyond the charge and scope of the study commission. I have to say that there were a few on the commission that were frustrated because we spent quite a bit of time going over the data, and we had the charge to find a way to save significant funds. And so to come forward and to say, we're not recommending any of the options we looked at, initially felt frustrating, at least to me, and I think a few of my colleagues. I would say, pointing to the next slide, that I believe there's quite a bit of value in the work of the Commission, and I have no regrets for any of the time spent, both at meetings and preparing for them. And I appreciate the work of the district staff and the consultant to pull all the information together. That information is going to be very helpful for you going forward. I think every year you're going to face significant challenges with the budget. It's always happened. It's going to happen again into the future. And the knee-jerk reaction by many is, why don't you just redistrict? And we haven't had good data on that in the past. We've had hunches, but we haven't had good data, and we haven't had the chance to actually look at options. And so, if nothing else, the options that you see show the level of change that would be required to save something on the order of $2.8 million if all you were going to do is handle the buildings. I think being a former board member and chair and a former chief operations officer for Portland Public Schools, that list and the idea of what you have to look at to see how much money you're going to save is valuable. I would say that the information going forward will be helpful in other ways. We looked at the overall building use, but as Mr. Thomas brought up just now, we kept school size in terms of, well, class size and the use of the classrooms at the high school level constant. So in some regards, the savings that we identified could be even higher if you had more students per class and didn't allocate one room per teacher. So there's elements of this that could be used in the future, but the buildings themselves are a relatively small part. In fact, there were suggestions that we simply move a school, changing nothing else, into the existing space at Portland High School. For instance, moving Casco Bay High School there. Not significant savings around that. We don't own the school district doesn't own the buildings, and so any buildings that are sold, the funds go to the city and not to the school. So you can't count on that. And we have debt service, which is on a yearly basis not significant, and our lease is over for Cathedral isn't of the magnitude of millions. I've been assured by the superintendent that that this, even though it says up here that the options explored do not have a shelf life, that the information that we developed won't be just put on the shelf, that it'll be a resource for your discussions going forward. And so with that, I'd just like to once again thank the members of the commission. Several of them are here. Commissioner Grant's here. Commissioner Crowley is here. And Commissioner Olafson's here, and then Commissioner Morioni, and Ms. Thompson is not here tonight, but she was on the commission as well. Hopefully I didn't miss anyone. I just want to thank you and the staff for helping to put all this together.
Thank you, Mr. Eglinton. Do we have any questions on the motion?
At some point.
Yeah, I do too. Is there any public comment on the motion? Oh, I'm sorry. Mr. Inabansa had a question. I actually do have a question as well. Mr. Inabansa.
Do you know what will happen to like teachers? Like what will happen to like teachers if we created like like option 2, option 3, like all the options, and like what will happen to the teachers if like classrooms have to be reduced and stuff? Would teachers have to be laid off or something like that?
Yes, that's correct.
So I just have a real quick question. I was able to attend most of, actually all the commission meetings except for one. And I remember in one of the initial sessions, one of the commission members, I believe it was Mr. Dana, he asked if it would be possible for the members of the commission to visit the buildings at any point during the process. I'm wondering if that opportunity was ever capitalized by anybody. I know that obviously we have representatives from our unions who actually work in these buildings, but I'm wondering about the community members.
Sure. We did not have an opportunity to visit the schools as a body, but we invited those individuals who were interested to contact the superintendent and arrange for it. So I don't know if anyone took them up on that.
Yeah. Excellent. One last question. I've lost my thought now. Oh, jeez. Oh yes, one last question. As the charge of the committee was to find savings, potential savings for the district, and I'm seeing a document that's attached to what ultimately was approved by the commission, there is a quote-unquote charge in this document for us to seriously evaluate filling excess space in the school buildings and with programs or offices that are currently not exist. But I heard a moment ago by Mr. Thomas that those empty spaces are not really efficiencies, and filling them up wouldn't necessarily create any savings. And so well, I probably don't need Mr. Thomas to answer this question. I'm more interested in seeing what is the basis for that recommendation that doesn't, in my opinion, fit the charge of the commission and is not attached to a dollar figure.
So that particular recommendation was put forward as an amendment by several of the commission members, and so it was adopted along with the rest of the statement. Part of the charge was to look where relevant, look at the available spaces in the buildings for non-school purposes. And so broadly, it fit within the charge that we were given when we started on our first day. We didn't have much discussion about moving non-school activities, with the exception of how we identify them in these options, which envisioned moving them to a middle school or another space. My hunch is, because we didn't specifically look at the dollar amounts for that, but that the dollar amount, it wouldn't be a cost savings or a significant one, particularly because of the where you're going to get your biggest savings is where you can reduce the staffing. So there wouldn't be significant impact from that. It would just be using the space more efficiently, and perhaps allow for another space to be released.
We did actually quantify both of those potential moves. So I don't remember the exact figures, but the mortgage payment, the debt service on the administration building is in the $200,000 range, and the lease at Cathedral for Portland Adult Education is in the $200,000 range. So between the two of them, we do not have, that was part of the analysis, we do not have a location that lends itself to taking in Portland Adult Ed. So the consideration of Portland High School was not adequate. It was, for 15 classrooms, they have 16 classrooms now, and so it is not something that you can just make it happen, and there's no loss involved. So I think that was ruled out on the basis of the fact that there just wasn't the right space. And there's lots of other considerations around parking and things along those lines, around having adults in a building where we also have teens. All of those things, we did not, for all of those reasons, we did not advance that as a viable opportunity. So.
Thank you, Superintendent. Ms. Bondo, you had a question?
Yes, I just have a question. When I see the way we can try to fill some of those space, I think my question is about Mr. Davis. When you've been studying those classes, about the configuration of some of those classes, are you feeling like in the future, if you want to try to maximize those classes, about some of the labs, to try to create some other technical labs, like a science labs, because this is really important to try to move some of those achievement gap, having those labs in the high school for science, for STEM, so our students can be able to have hands-on on those different activities, instead to send them to go to the Institute of Research looking at those cells. As a biochemist myself, I've been learning on that kind of atmosphere, having the labs in the school, so you can be able to search those cells on the microscope, just having your hands up. So are you think that maybe for the future those space can be used for that? Thank you.
Yeah, I actually, you said it quite well. I think when you look at the specialized kind of space, that there's a certain report that we did that broke everything into those categories, and you want to pay really close attention to how those specialized spaces are loaded. And I would note that particularly in Portland, maybe not so much in Deering, but in Portland, they're not real flexible. Because in a lot of the newer high schools, you see what they call it a combo lab, that it's a mixture of lab and lecture space. And it gives the instructor the opportunity to have all their kids scheduled for a period. They show up on the class schedule, and then they can use the abilities of that space however they want to use it. That isn't going to happen at Portland, because the rooms are too small. You have a chance of that happening at Deering. But yes, it's something you have to keep a close eye on.
Thank you. Any other board questions? Ms. Figdor?
Following up on the chair's question about this recommendation regarding filling excess space, I was curious that this was ultimately included, given that I don't believe that there was, well, so my question is how much conversation was there around this recommendation among commission members?
So there was general discussion in our small group discussions, and as the superintendent correctly raised, we did cost out specifically moving Portland Adult Ed into Portland, which is one of the elements of this. As you may experience as part of this body, there are amendments that are brought up and discussed. There's an opportunity to ask questions and debate, and then passage. And so that particular element, if it had come up even earlier, maybe we would have had more discussion about it. But it was in the moment.
Am I correct that it wasn't discussed in the moment at that final meeting?
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Ms. Maroney?
First, I want to say thank you to my fellow board members for giving me the opportunity to be on the commission. And I, again, regret that we didn't bring back from the commission something for us to really sink our teeth in and potentially agree upon. I also want to thank Mr. Eglinton for his leadership. It's always a pleasure to be with him, and he navigated all of this extremely well, so thank you so much for that. And thank you to our experts that came to work with us. Not an easy bunch at times, but I appreciate it. Having time to reflect even after this, I think we felt a bit hamstrung in a way by not being able to get our heads around the programmatic piece of it all. And one of the commission members even said, these are not widgets we're talking about. We're not talking about, okay, we can just, count them all up. We're just going to pick them up and move them over here. The capacity of a building is not the similar, you can't think of it as putting, widgets in a box and looking at it that way. And she was right on when it felt very hard to think of it in broader terms when you couldn't really foresee how programmatically it would be beneficial to our students. So in my mind, going in, thinking about it, the reason why I'm serving on the board is how can I be of best benefit to our students of the district, right? So with all of us thinking in that frame, it was hard to come up with something to say, okay, just look at it a cost-effective way without taking a look at, is it also in the best interest of our students and their learning? However, since our work on the commission, I've had time to ponder and think about things. And one question I have just for us to consider with staff to look into programmatically is we seem to be struggling with a couple of things right now. We seem to be struggling with the fact that we have paths it's so vital right now for our students who need or want that additional education and opportunity in the trades fields. to access, particularly daring students with the block schedule, to get to paths on time, to get to classes, from what I've heard from students, at least. And then we have Portland, it seems, working much better with Casco Bay students utilizing paths, and that's great. But I still feel like there's a disconnect sometimes between our traditional high schools and paths. So then I started thinking, well, what about if we have efficiency, if we have space in our high schools? It used to be, when there was no paths, that shop was inside our high schools, and these students could choose to do a shop class, and they had that access. So I'm just wondering if we could just consider and ponder what would it mean to have possibly even some of these paths classes relocate and/or, I mean, granted, there's machinery, there's big stuff going on at paths, but maybe there's other classes that happen at paths that could relocate into Deering and Portland so that that accessibility is, you know, shared, is back there too. So just something to consider. We didn't bring it up in commission, we didn't talk about that, but just when we're just thinking about efficiencies, what are we going to do with this space? And we're not going to gain a lot of money. This is not cost effective necessarily. It's just trying to think programmatically, and we could all start to think about, all right, what might be useful for our students' learning. And I just, like I said, I've been thinking about that and wanted to share that idea.
Appreciate it. Thank you. I'm going to go ahead and move us on to public comments. So if there's any public comment on the motion, please come in. Please step up.
Good evening. I'm David Hopkinson of 9 Grafton Street. Obviously, I have something to say about everything. I'm just going to stick with kind of where I've been in the past, and that is that I think the commission did a nice job with what it was brought, and that more time would have been necessary even with the charge that it had. However, I'm going to adamantly stick with that the charge that they had was wrong because of the 4-school bond, and especially now that we have our student leaders in here. The community voted to fix 4 schools, K through 5. We said how much money to spend, and we said how to spend it. That bond has intent and it has morality attached to it if it does not have legal standing. That money needs to be spent specifically on those schools as it was allocated. Every result coming out of the commission changed something within those 4 schools. That's not what was voted on. They shouldn't be considered as part of the process, and we should move on. They do have a shelf life. They shouldn't be on the shelf. Money was told to be spent in a particular way. We need to do that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other public comment? Anita.
Good evening. I'm Anita St. Ange. I'm the director of Portland Adult Ed. And I just wanted to say for the public and also for the board that when people are talking about moving PAE into little spaces here and there, that in our academic programs we serve over 2,000 students in a given year. We have 16 classes. Many of those classrooms have 30 students in 5 different schedules, starting at 8:30 in the morning and ending at 8:30 at night. And these are vital classes for our community. We are using some space at Portland High School, which has been great. We've had our Education Academy there. We've had an intensive language class, and we're currently using one of the labs for one of our science classes. And Portland High administration has been great. We've loved being there. They've loved having us. But the security for our 10, 12 students who are going there is significant, and it should be. You shouldn't be having adults in high school students who are, who are wandering and whatever. So, for 10 students going to a lab or 12 students going to a particular class, that's fine. For 2,000 students, it won't work. So I think that when we start thinking about Portland Adult Ed, we need to really understand the breadth of that discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Anita. Any other public comment? Okay, we'll close that. Is there any board discussion on the motion? Ms. Trevor?
I just wanted to once again say thank you to the commission and to our contractors that worked on this. I know it was a very accelerated timeline and a lot of information, and we did come into it because of budgetary circumstance, and we did give the guidance to look for cost savings. So I understand the frustration kind of not being able to come to a recommendation for that, but for all the reasons that Mr. Eglinton stated, I think this is valuable work to the board, because at this point we can say we have looked at it. Last year we couldn't say that during the budget cycle, so now we have data to inform our decision making. So thank you for all your work.
Ms. Davis.
I would like to echo the earlier comments and thank the commission very much. I think we actually have gotten valuable information from this, and thinking about, we're now in a better place to perhaps pull back and really think about the portfolio of educational offerings that we have in our district, and to look at how we are building those, expanding those, making clear pathways for students who desire to learn in a particular way, whether that's expeditionary learning or international baccalaureate. And we've now got data that will enable us as a board to look at how we may look at some educational offerings and changes that might make sense, because we've got the demographic data and the sense of, and a better sense of what our buildings can and can't do as we go forward. So thank you very much to the time and effort of the community members and the staff who worked on this. It was a lot of work in a very short period of time, but it is not work that will sit on a shelf. It's work that we will use going forward to guide the district.
Thank you. Any other discussion? Seeing none, I'll just chime in real quick before we move on to a vote, that I also am greatly thankful for all the work of the commission members and staff. It was a really condensed timeline for amount of work that normally would take much longer. So I do appreciate the work that went into it. I believe that the information that we gained from this study is valuable, and it will be used in our deliberations in many aspects of the board's work. Having said that, I believe that information lives and is accessible to us separate of this document that's before us to accept and recommend. I will not be voting in favor of passing this document to the Finance Committee because I am not comfortable with the language here that asks us to consider filling space, in my opinion, simply for the sake of filling space. I'm not comfortable with a community that feels like empty spaces in our high school means that there's empty rooms that are being wasted. I hear from teachers all the time about creative ways in which these spaces are used, about ELL students who have to have special spaces to not be in general classes because they need a little bit of extra attention. I hear from teachers who have to work with substitute teachers that come into their buildings, and having extra spaces becomes incredibly valuable. So again, I believe that the information the commission brought onto or was able to review is immensely valuable, and it is accessible to the board outside of this document, and that's why I don't feel comfortable sending this particular document to the Finance Committee. Having said that, all those in favor of accepting the Enrollment and Facility Study Commission final recommendation and draft final report, and recommend to the Finance Committee for inclusion as backup materials during the FY 2019 and 2020 budget deliberations, please indicate. All those opposed? 1, 2, 3. So the motion passes with a vote, I'm sorry, I lost my count, of six in favor and 2 opposed, and the majority of the students voting with the majority. Thank you. Next, the big item of the night. First of all, I apologize that we are at a late time to get to this item, that the majority of the folks in the building are here to to listen to. Consideration and action to accept the superintendent's FY20 budget and refer to the Finance Committee. Is there a motion? Ms. Trevorrow, second by Mr. Balfans. Superintendent, please.
Good evening. Today we begin my third budget process with our presentation of the 2020 budget proposal. Today's presentation is divided into two parts. The first part will focus on how the budget I'm proposing represents our joint commitment as a community to invest in new programs and services that we believe are necessary to realize our goals. And then the second part will provide detailed information on the overall budget, the expenditures, the revenue, the cost drivers, and the tax effort that it implies. When I started my work here in Portland almost 3 years ago, the first charge I got from the board was to update the district's comprehensive plan. Over the first 6 months of my tenure, we worked with staff, with parents, with students, community partners, and of course with you, the board, to develop our new strategic plan, the Portland Promise. We named it that because more than a plan, it represents a commitment to each other. It's a commitment to build on the existing work in the district, build on the commitments that already exist to quality education, and invest in making them better. The promise is that all of our students will graduate prepared and empowered for the next steps in their lives, whatever they may be. Prepared, as you know, means that they have the knowledge and skills that they need, and empowered means that they have a plan. And both the preparation and the planning are the results of the work of our school community, of our teachers, our families, our partners, working together to fulfill that promise. The Portland Promise has set 4 goals: that our students will attain academic excellence, that our students will acquire positive social and emotional skills, and that we will courageously confront inequities and do whatever we need to do to overcome them. We recognized also that our work is about human development, and that in this line of work, our people, our teachers, educational technicians, bus drivers, cafeteria workers, principals, and all of our other educators are the basis on which the success is built. In early 2017, the board adopted the Portland Promise. Today, my budget proposal continues our road to deliver on that promise. The first part of our presentation today will walk through our proposed investments for realizing the promise. And it's important that we realize that we're talking about a drop of water in a pool. The overall costs of the proposed investments represent less than 3% of our total budget. But like a drop of water in a pool, I firmly believe that these investments that we propose today will have an outsized effect on the pool as they ripple out and alter the course of the future for many of our students. And it's important to also understand this year's set of investments as part of a continuum. This will be our second year making specific investments that are directly tied to our goals and strategies. Last year, we focused on investments that allowed us to build up our ability to create opportunities for our students to have meaningful relationships with caring adults, and also to expose them to real-life learning opportunities. Last year also allowed us to start to strengthen our support structure for strong core instruction in our schools, particularly in the area of middle school mathematics. This year's proposed investments set us on a course to build on that latter point. They also allow us to address a key equity concern as we scale up access to pre-kindergarten for our 4-year-olds, with a focus on students who come from poverty. Finally, this year's investments also allow us to strengthen our system of behavioral supports for all of our students. I want to be clear that these are the most significant investments that I believe we can make that are also cognizant of the financial implications of our choices. I want to recognize that there are other important priorities that are not reflected in these proposals. But before we begin, I would be remiss if I did not thank the many people that have helped to shape these proposals. First and foremost, I would like to acknowledge our Portland Public Schools team, our people. I'm blessed to lead one of the most talented and passionate groups of educators I've ever had the opportunity to work with. You will be hearing from Malia Nally, our Assistant Superintendent for Teaching and Learning, and from our Executive Director of Budget and Finance, Alicia Gardner. But they're just the tip of the iceberg. They represent the over 1,000 educators, hundreds of volunteers and partners, and others working day in and day out to build and nurture relationships, teach challenging content, and otherwise ensure that the largest and most diverse student population in the state of Maine is prepared and empowered for the future. And I would also be remiss if I didn't acknowledge you, the board. You have been strong partners in the development of these investments. Over the course of this year, you have continued to drive us to be thoughtful, to be thorough, and to be true to our Portland Promise goals. You have provided us countless hours of insights and oversight as we shaped our agenda. Nothing in what you hear today should be a surprise. That's one of the tests I've set for myself. But nothing that you hear today would be a reality either without your guidance and without your support. And finally, I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge that this proposal comes on the heels of a challenging budget picture. As you heard during our previous agenda item, we spent a considerable amount of time and energy and resources looking at possible efficiencies this past year. We're also continuing to work with our legislative delegation and state leaders to ensure that Portland has the ability to continue to strive for better education for all Portlanders without having property taxes be the only source for funding the work that we are trying to do. And with that, I will turn it over to Assistant Superintendent Malia Nally to lead us through a discussion of the three major investments, and I will return later as we transition to the financial details to discuss other investments that we are also proposing. Malia?
Great, thank you. So as you recall, our first investment priority is designed to advance our achievement and equity goals, and specifically we're focused on lifting the first strategy under our achievement goal, which is related to core instruction. You are familiar with this data, which reveals that about 50% of our students are proficient in the ELA or English Language Arts standards, and we see a significant gap between students who are economically disadvantaged and those who are not. This is true for math as well, where we see about 36% of all students at grade level, and again, a significant gap between student subgroups. As we've said before, these data are a call to action to raise achievement for all students and to take urgent steps towards addressing the opportunity gap that results in the pronounced difference in achievement we see across student subgroups at all grade spans. There are many strategies needed to raise achievement and address these gaps. We are choosing to focus deeply on core instruction because we believe there's a need to do so. Our results indicate a need for all students to increase their mastery of grade level content, and we have also recognized that our positive efforts to meet individual students' needs may have led to inadvertently giving inconsistent access to grade level learning for some students. Our attention on core instruction is focused on supporting teachers with ensuring their tasks and learning experiences are aligned to grade level standards, and on ensuring that our curricula and assessments are differentiated to meet a range of different needs. We like to say that we're looking for low floor, high ceiling tasks so that all students are held to high expectations with the right supports. This is in line with our first two learning beliefs, as I think you guys know. As far as our approach goes, we acknowledge that there is no single strategy or easy solution. The article Member Davis shared recently with you all noted, quote, "It may be a mistake to think of curriculum choice and teaching reforms as alternative ways of improving student outcomes. Rather, to gain the benefits of either, districts may need to do both," end quote. One thing from the research that we think is critical and hopeful is that there are many things within our control as educators that make a bigger difference on a student's learning and academic outcomes than their socioeconomic status, home life, or even motivation. Here you see that a sense of collective efficacy among teachers is greater than 3 times more powerful and predictive of student achievement than socioeconomic status. And teacher quality and curriculum matter more to achievement than home life and other factors. Our 2020 investments line up with our theory of action around strengthening core instruction, which is about a comprehensive set of tools and supports with a focus on alignment across the grades and follow-through in terms of supporting teachers with the work. The intent is to sustain the math work that is already underway, grow a deeper focus on early literacy, and to sustain and expand the initial science and social studies work that was started this year. In order to do this, we need to invest in coaching, professional development, and curriculum. Specifically, and you're going to see as you're looking up here, we're looking at FTEs, so people are positions on the left and non-FTE detail on the right. So specifically on the FTE side, we are proposing that we continue with a full-time math coach who supports all 3 middle schools. This was in the budget last year as a full-time contract, and we're shifting this to an internal teacher leader position. We also intend to continue and expand the work Brooke Teller started on her sabbatical this year to support and coordinate district-wide science, technology, and engineering instruction. This cost is offset by a reduction in the cost of sabbatical. Over on the non-FTE side, we are investing in elementary math curriculum, where we're beginning to pilot illustrative math, which is the same resource we adopted for middle school this past year. And you'll see the investment there is largely focused on the PD around that to support our teachers. We're looking at a continued investment in middle school math curriculum and the related professional development. A new investment in professional development related to the science that undergirds early literacy development, and costs to support the early adoption of a common phonics curriculum at the elementary level. So in total, this amounts to $276,000 or a 3.5 cents on the tax rate. So next, our next investment priority is aligned to whole student and equity. And it's linked to the first strategy around building a shared framework and plan for advancing social emotional learning and behavioral health for all students. As we've reviewed with you before, there is a clear need to prioritize this work. The research is clear that children have an increase in mental health needs these days, and it demonstrates that by attending to social emotional learning, there is both a positive impact on prosocial behaviors and academic achievement. Our strategy is focused on district-wide PBIS, or positive behavioral interventions and supports. Many people have different ideas about what PBIS is and means. So at its core, it's a decision-making framework for how to build explicit expectations and supports to help all students meet those expectations. This framework calls on schools in the district to use a multi-tiered system of supports that become more intense and individualized as the student need increases. There is significant science behind this strategy, and we've had a handful of schools implementing it for many years now. In supporting schools with their individualized action plans around this work, we're also looking at the degree to which these systems, routines, and supports are trauma sensitive and culturally responsive. Within the larger behavioral health continuum for the district, there is a more targeted support needed for students with IEPs who have emotional and behavioral disabilities. These students are currently being served in schools and in our Bayside Day Treatment Program. As you know, we've been on a more than year-long journey to develop a strategy to strengthen the continuum of what we call least restrictive services for these students, and to refine and move our day treatment program. This budget proposal includes the refined BREATHE program model, which includes in-school BREATHE support programming at all grade spans and a more restrictive and high-support day treatment program. You'll see here that there are many FTE adds for this program, and as a reminder, the cost for these FTEs is largely offset by the reduction in outside behavioral health professionals, we call them BHPs, and by a significant increase in reimbursements for Maine Care billing. By adding the resources listed on this slide and in your budget book, we'll be able to continue our collaborative support services team, which supports students who can mainstream with minimal support, offer in-school Breathe programs at 2 elementary schools that will serve the whole district, all 3 middle schools and 2 high schools, and retain in-district day treatment for students who really need that. So altogether, the cost to enact this significant evolution to our Breathe program is $530,000, or 6.6 cents on the tax rate. And then finally, the budget includes an investment in expanding access to public pre-K to get us a step closer to delivering on the pre-K promise to the city. This work is aligned to our equity goal and the related benchmarks. And you are all very familiar, I believe, with the research about how pre-K can make a significant difference in starting students on a more level playing field when they enter kindergarten. The design of our expansion strategy is intended to be responsive to what families actually need in order to take advantage of this critical opportunity, especially families from low-income backgrounds. We have settled on a goal of adding at least 140 more seats over the next 5 years with a mix of PPS and community partner classrooms. Our motion requires all teachers to be PPS teachers on the PEA contract, includes before and after care, and calls for a transportation strategy. The investments in the 2020 budget reflect the addition of 2 new classrooms, bringing existing community partner teachers onto the PEA contract, providing the before and after care, providing English language development services, and building in capacity to support, coordinate, and oversee the program and the expansion over time. The total budget impact for these additions is $560,000, or 7 cents on the tax rate. So I'm going to hand it back to the superintendent.
Thank you, Malia. And as you know, people are the foundation of our work. That is why in our Portland Promise, the base on which all the other goals rest is on people. We specified a set of strategies to ensure that our staff have the tools that they need and that they need to do the work that they are asked to do in an environment that builds on their ability to deliver on our achievement, whole student, and equity goals. As you know, approximately 80% of our budget goes to pay for the people that do the work of our school district. In addition to the existing staffing and those additional investments that Malia shared, we have a handful of other investments that I would like to highlight. First, we're proposing a plan to refresh staff technology. This investment will allow us to provide new work devices for all of our elementary teachers and also including our 6th grade teachers who are not included in our MLTI refresh program. We're also proposing a plan to ensure that we're able to staff up our transportation department. As you have probably seen in the popular media, school districts in Maine and across the country have been struggling to attract and retain transportation staff. Our proposal, which has been successfully piloted in the last couple of months under the leadership of our transportation team led by Eric Wood, provides the type of positions that we believe give us a leg up on hiring. They also provide incentives to staff to help us recruit and train new staff. We're also proposing to staff our Peaks and Cliff Island schools with a full-time teacher leader. This investment represents a return to previous staffing levels that are supported by the experience this year with a part-time teacher leader. And we're proposing to add administrative and support capacity to our special education department. As you will recall from the recent presentation by some of our teachers, this was highlighted as an area of significant need. And finally, we are proposing to add a part-time social worker for Portland Adult Ed, which, as you will also recall, was highlighted as a need during the recent teacher presentation to the board. Not in the category of people, but also things that we wanted to highlight for you are that after 2 years of planning, we are starting a new program at Portland Arts and Technology High School. That's our cybersecurity program. This high skills and high wages addition to our PATHS programming, all of this offering is largely offset with CTE funds. And finally, we're submitting an application to renew our community eligibility program, through which students at 4 of our schools receive free lunch. Because of federal rules associated with that program, we do not believe that our current numbers will allow us to receive sufficient reimbursement to offset our costs completely. But this program has been an important one in assisting us to increase participation and to reduce food insecurity. So we're proposing to offset the costs with general revenue funds. This joins our current investments in universal free breakfast at our high schools as a way in which we work towards ensuring our students' nutritional needs are met. And now we will transition to the presentation on the budget details led by Executive Director of Budget and Finance, Alicia but before we do that, sorry, this was a late transfer and it's not in my notes. This is a summary of all of our investments, and what we want to highlight for you is that the total investments, which I mentioned in my initial comments, amount to less than 2% of our total budget and are a 22-cent impact on the tax rate. And with that, I will turn it over to Alicia.
All right, thank you very much. So we're going to talk some numbers now. First, we're going to go through our expenditure budget, and then we're going to follow up with revenues, and finally, we'll finish up with the tax impact. The FY 2020 Superintendent's recommended budget calls for a total spending of $117,795,091, an increase of $7.2 million, or 6.5%. Of that $7.2 million, approximately $2.6 million, or 2.2% of the total budget, is for new investments in the Portland Promise, as we just heard. Existing salaries and benefits make up 77% of the overall budget at just over $90 million. Contracted services, which includes a variety of budget items such as professional services, employee training, professional development, repair and maintenance, and facilities costs, among many other things, makes up 8.7% of the overall budget at $10.3 million. Supplies includes supplies for all schools and departments, food supplies, utility costs, and technology supplies. This budget category makes up 3.8% of our overall budget at $4.5 million. We have an other budget category, which is relatively small at only $800,000 and includes items such as field trip transportation, dues and fees, and contingency funds. This is 0.7% of our overall budget. You can see it's a little purple sliver up there. And finally, debt service is our final category, which is just over $8.8 million in FY 2020. This includes the first year of debt payments for the Lyseth School renovation, which is just over $1 million. Our first category that I'm going to bring you through is our salary budget. And on this slide, you'll see both regular salaries and our sort of all other salaries, which includes temporary employees, subs, and stipends. So the proposed salary budget for 2020 is $71,440,551. It includes professional salaries, instructional aides, administrators in school buildings and at central office, and support staff throughout the schools and departments. It also includes temporary salaries for adult education teachers, substitute costs, teacher additional pay, stipends, and differentials, and retirement sick payouts. This is an increase of $4.1 million, or 6.1% over FY 2019. Included in this total is approximately $2.2 million in new salaries and benefits for the Portland Promise investments that we just talked about. As noted on this slide, this also includes a proposed reduction of 5 elementary teachers based on projected enrollment for the 2019-2020 school year. The benefits budget is increasing about $1.4 million over FY 2019 to a total of about $21.5 million. This is an increase of 7.3%. The flexible benefits category includes health and dental insurance, Medicare, and long-term disability costs. We've budgeted an 8% increase in health insurance and a 5% increase in dental. We do not yet know what our final numbers will be, and that actually won't be available to us in April, so there is a chance that that could change. The district is not responsible for the increase above 3% for the teachers and administrators per the union contract, which is why that percentage is less than 8%. Medicare and long-term disabilities are variable depending on salary increases. We chose to reduce our unemployment compensation by $30,000 in this budget based on usage over the past several fiscal years. Another change in FY 2020 is our retirement costs are up approximately $300,000 or 9%. A portion of this increase is variable and due to an increase in salaries. However, there's an increase of 4.8% in the amount the Portland Public Schools pays towards the Maine Public Employees Retirement System for the teachers plan, where last year we paid in 3.97% of salaries, and this year we pay in 4.16% of salaries. So that is an increase. And finally, we continue to see a reduction in workers' compensation insurance, and we are holding life insurance the same as last year. Our debt service budget is up $544,000 overall, or 6.8% over FY19. These figures are provided to us annually by the City of Portland, as they are ultimately responsible for issue and managing repayment of all debt. A significant amount of debt rolled off between last fiscal year and the projected budget, because as I mentioned previously, the first year of the Lyseth renovation payment is in this total and is expected to be over $1 million. So this represents all other budget categories and is total spending of just over $16 million, an increase of just over $1 million or 7.2%. So included notable increases in this section are an increase of $250,000 in tuition to private sources, which covers outplacement of special education students, $92,500 to cover new leases for staff K through 6, as we just talked about, $114,000 in professional development, and $117,000 in curriculum costs for our core instruction investment. We have a planned increase of $50,000 in our natural gas costs, $60,000 in gasoline, and $193,000 in repair and maintenance throughout the district, with $50,000 of that set aside for the renovations for the Breathe program. An additional $25,000 to the City of Portland for athletic field maintenance, and a planned increase of $22,000 for outside mowing and plowing contracts. And we've also included a $50,000 increase in rental cost for the cathedral for our Portland Adult Ed building. So all of those total are just about $1 million. I already said that, sorry. So this is our expenditure summary total. As we just went through all of these categories, we are up the $7.2 million. $4.6 million of that is existing staffing, programming, and contracts, and $2.6 is the new investments that we spoke about earlier tonight. So now we're going to go through the revenue side of the budget. How do we pay for all of this? So before we get into the revenue totals, I think it's important to understand how our education budget is funded. The blue portion shows the total amount of our budget that's supported by property taxes. The red portion shows the amount coming from the state of Maine in education subsidy. The green amount is all other general fund revenue. The purple is use of fund balance, so funds left over from prior budgets that we're allocating to offset tax needs. The light blue is adult ed revenue, specifically in tuition, and the orange is food service revenue. So in FY 2019, the tax levy made up 80.1% of the overall funding for the budget, as compared to this budget, which calls for a 79.6% of total funding. Although we are seeing an increase in state subsidy revenue, as we're going to discuss in a few slides, it still only represents a small portion of our overall budget at 14.1%, as compared to last year where it represented 14.8%. And this year, our largest revenue gain was in our other revenue category due to the increased Maine Care reimbursement for the BREATHE program and the addition of $100,000 in indirect cost sharing for our federal grants. So the non-tax portion of this budget is up almost $1.5 million or 6.8% over last year. So included in these revenues are, oops, I'm sorry, I lost my mouse. Oh no, oh there it is, sorry guys. So tuition paid for out-of-district students to attend Portland schools, tuition paid for adult education programming, daily sales and federal funds for school nutrition, transportation billing for outside groups, building rental fees, gate receipts for our athletic events, state education subsidy, and Maine Care reimbursement. So you may remember this chart from last year. So we've added the FY 2020 bar, and we just wanted to show visually how the $700,000 from the state is shown. So you can see that our CTE revenue, that orange bar, is very similar to what it was last year. You'll see in a minute it's actually up only 0.12% over last year. Our purple bars are our debt service reimbursement. It's actually down a little bit, but that's the nature of how debt repayment works. It's going to continue to go down. So that $700,000 is going sort of into our EPS pre-K through 12, but really the takeaway here is even with the increase in $700,000, you can see that our revenue picture is still down from prior years. So the colors on the left sort of correspond with the bars that I was just talking you through. So this is our second largest revenue source. It's our state education subsidy. We received our preliminary estimate in mid-February that we will receive about $17.6 million, an increase of just over $700,000 or 4.17%. This $700,000 represents just 0.6% of the revenue needed to fund our budget in FY 2020. For 2020, the overall funding formula has not changed significantly, unlike last year where there were significant changes that we needed to navigate. There are two areas that account for a majority of the increase in allocation, and those areas are special education and regionalization and efficiency. The special education funding formula has increased the baseline amount that we receive for each one of our special ed students, as well as the amount that we receive for high-cost students. So as you can see here, we received $976,000 more special ed dollars than we did for FY 2019. The Portland voters approved the Portland Public Schools joining the Greater Sebago Education Alliance as part of the regionalization efforts encouraged by the Department of Education in order to offset our loss in system administration funding. While the system administration funding did decline for 2020, which we knew was going to happen, the amount we were receiving for regionalization and efficiency went up by $96,000 or 104%. So had we not joined the Greater Sebago Education Alliance, we would not be receiving that funding. In total, our allocation, which represents the minimum budget that the district is allowed to have, is $88.1 million, which increased just under $1.3 million or about 1.5%. And this is fairly in line with what we were projecting that the allocation would increase. However, you may recall that we were very worried about what our increase in valuation would mean for us, as we knew our state equalized valuation was rising over $266 million as compared to the prior year. Due to the increase in education funding proposed in the governor's budget, the state was able to reduce the mill rate, which determines the amount to be raised locally depending on valuation. Portland's local expectation increased by $560,000 because the mill rate was brought down by 20 cents. To put this into context, had our mill rate stayed at $8.48 like it was for last year, our local expectation would have been $1.7 million higher, and we would have lost $400,000. So that's a swing of $1.1 million we've seen because that rate was brought down. So what does this mean for our tax needs? In total, The increase in expenditures of $7.2 million, less the increase in non-tax revenue of 1.47 or 1.46 million, calls for a tax increase of about $5.7 million. This represents an increase in the tax levy of 6.5% over last year. However, our assessed value has risen $85 million, which reduces the amount that our tax rate will be. So because of this, we anticipate that the school portion of the City of Portland tax rate will rise 60 cents to $11.74, an increase of 5.4%. The addition of 60 cents equates to a property tax increase of $144 annually on a home valued at $240,000, which is exactly $12 per month. And with that, I'm going to hand it back to Superintendent Botana.
Thank you, Alicia, and we are going to end now and give you an opportunity to ask questions, but I just do want to point out that the overarching goal of the Portland Public Schools fiscal year 2020 budget proposal is to deliver on the Portland Promise. I look forward to a robust discussion with you, with the Finance Committee here, with the Finance Committee of the City Council, with the City Council, and I ask our community to remain informed, to become engaged in this process as we move forward towards a referendum on June 11th. So with that, thank you very much for your attention, and we're open to your questions.
Does anybody have any questions? You don't have to wait for me. Ms. Morioni.
Thank you, Superintendent and staff, wherever Alicia's right there. I guess my question is, looking at this, as we look out a little bit even further, and now we have the new governor and what we is actually a benefit from where we were last year, and even though you're right, it's not quite, since the valuation did go up, it's not quite as helpful as we had hoped. But any other, I don't know whether we know yet what the governor's intent might be, how we may fare even for future years, because again, with the debt service, we'll be continuing to add more with our bonds and so forth. So just curious as to any projections.
I can certainly get that back for you. This is some work that we've done with our the enrollment facility study to project out. So I believe at the current mill rate that we have now, if that were to carry us forward to next year, I believe it's a projected $1.5 million loss. Next year, our valuation is going up by over $500 million. That's already confirmed. The year after is an estimate at this point, but is about the same, another $500 million. At our old mill rate, which was the 848 that I had referenced earlier, the loss projection for both years was over $3 million. At this lower rate, it's reduced. In the plan for next year's budget, I believe puts actually more money into the education formula than it does in year one. So it's not crazy to believe that that mill rate would drop again, but that depends on sort of what happens as they go through other bills and how those get funded and how much of that total gets eaten up by sort of new initiatives. So sort of where we stand right now.
A follow-up question is regarding our special ed work, the BREATHE program. Is what's in the budget now as proposed, is that basically where we want to be with that program? In other words, after this year, we would then have it locked in the budget as this is the program shift, and we wouldn't see a, I mean, it would need to be maintained, obviously, but is this sort of the big year of having that additional funding piped in, or is this just the beginning of that phased-in approach with our special ed students?
Yeah, I mean, there's always the students who show up, needs evolve, but yes, the intention is that we've designed a program that we believe meets the needs of our students that we have now. Yeah. So, I do want to just be clear, we don't know what the mix of students and the numbers will look like, but the intention is that this is the big year to invest to get it in place.
Any other questions? Ms. Bigler?
I had a number of questions, but just to start, could you, Alicia, Ms. Gardner, clarify, I know it's embedded in these numbers, but what are just the straight increased costs, the escalators of just carrying over what we're doing now to next year?
So, I have that. So the escalators of sort of what we're doing right now, along with things like debt service that are built in, was about $4.6 million, and our investments are another 2.6 on top of that. So I believe Superintendent Vitana mentioned that the investments were 22 cents, so that would make the other half of it 38 cents.
Thank you. My other questions weren't necessarily directed to you.
Okay.
But at one of our recent board meetings, we had a number of teachers come and talk with us about the challenges they were facing doing their jobs based on resource limitations. So, for instance, there was a special education teacher who talked about the challenges of losing team leaders for special ed, and how special ed teachers now are having to choose between doing compliance work and serving students. And I'm wondering how this budget addresses that concern. There is another teacher who talked about the music department previously having 25 teachers, and now we're at 15, and talking about how music has been just cut to the bone. And so those were examples that from that evening that I really remember. I'm wondering how we're addressing those very poignant concerns that were brought forward to us.
So one of them, the first one, we are addressing, that is part of the additional investment that I described around the support structure in the special education department, and I look forward to discussing that in detail with the Finance Committee instead of trying to do that tonight, because we're not prepared to go at that level. So that one is being addressed, but there is nothing in the budget that addresses the music program. As I mentioned in my remarks, there are other priorities that exist that we are not able to address in this budget, so there are things for us to do into the future.
In the budget book in the back, there are a number of pages that discuss the investments in fairly great detail. There are sort of the summary squares that you saw as part of the presentation, but there's also narratives underneath explaining why many of these investments are included. And on page 27, there's a narrative about sort of the support services administrative team changes.
I want to just jump in real quick before we get to the next question, and just kind of bring the board back to what we are intending to accomplish tonight. The motion is to refer the budget to the finance meeting, and the only reason that I want to circle back around to that is because I want to respect the work that will take place at the finance committee level. So I want to try not to start diving too deep into the weeds of the details of this budget. I think a lot of the answers that we might be looking for tonight are purposely supposed to be part of the process at the Finance Committee. So I just want to be mindful of what we are intending to do with the motion on the floor right now. Thank you. I didn't mean not to have you ask questions. Ms. Bondo, please go ahead.
clarification here. On the new addition investment, I just want to understand, the social worker that we adding is for where exactly? Adult education or any other specific school?
So I'm going to lean on you guys for the details. I know that we have 5 additional social work positions associated with the increase for the BREATHE program, so for our behavioral health continuum, and 0.5 social work position that we're also adding at Portland Adult Education.
Is there a reason for that? I'm just asking. Because when I just refer to the, maybe we can go more deeper when we're going to adjust, yeah. I will go later on, yes.
Okay.
I don't want to discourage anyone from asking questions. I just want to allow the superintendent to answer, maybe by saying that's a valid question we'll discuss at the finance level. And kind of, it's important that we do ask questions, so I don't want to discourage that part.
And we will be more than happy to address that in detail at the in the finance committee.
Yeah. Ms. Victor, go ahead.
I have one last question. The budget envisions cutting 5 elementary school teacher positions. Can you tell us where those positions would be eliminated?
I don't remember the details. Do you have them off the top of your head?
I do. So there are 2 at Rowe, 1 at Lyseth, 1 at Ocean, and 1 at Presumpscot.
Any other questions? Ms. Bondo?
I try to figure out to see where the multilingual is being located on those specific budget. Or you have any details? Because I just wonder about the...
So this budget shows everything in the aggregate. It includes the general fund, adult education, and food services all in one budget. What we're going to be presenting on Thursday will include a more detailed cost center summary for each group, and multilingual will be pulled out in that review.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
Can I just add something around the Ms. Vigdor's question about what she described as cuts to elementary positions. I want to be clear that from our perspective, those are not cuts to elementary positions, that those are adjustments based on the board's approved class size numbers and our application of those class size numbers to the current enrollment projections for schools next year. I do want to remind the board that that is a process that we engage in annually. This year, the opposite of that happened, where we actually had to add at least 1 classroom. We actually added 2 classrooms at Lyseth after the school year started, based on the number of students that actually materialized. And we also, at that time, reduced the position at East End that we wound up not needing. So these are the kinds of administrative adjustments that I think you expect from us in an effort to be responsive to schools and responsible to the taxpayers.
I understand that. I'm just looking at the enrollment figures that are in this book, and it looks like elementary enrollment, I guess we don't have the projections. I'm sorry. We do have the projections. They're just
projections now.
So those are, we in essence, I mean, we can explain this in detail, and we have a chart that shows exactly how we do this, the rollovers, and where the rollovers create numbers that allow us to reduce as well as increase. We have some of the schools where you have, 2 reductions and 1 increase, so that netted a single reduction in the school. But it wasn't just that static. There's actually movement, up as well as movement down.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay. Seeing none. I just have one question, more or less about the process. Earlier this year, we received some guidance from the City Council on the budget, but at the time that guidance was discussed and given, we were looking at a very different financial situation. So perhaps, and I don't expect us to go over that right now, but perhaps we could talk about how we will join, how our joint meetings with the Finance Committee and the city will probably include that discussion as well, revisit that discussion and clarify the guidance that they will ultimately give us as we shape the budget. I don't know if Ms. Trevor wants to chime in on that, or the superintendent.
I think you said it well. We have our joint finance committee meeting next Wednesday, so we'll be able to hear their take on where we are at that point. The budget guidance workshop that the council had was kind of, I mean, they didn't arrive really at any sort of majority sentiment, which makes it not all that helpful to us. But I think, you know, our last joint meeting with them was before, like you said, before the state budget came out. And so we didn't know what our picture was going to look like in terms of state funding. It's maybe a little more optimistic than we were thinking at that time. And so perhaps their thinking has changed. So I think that will be a good thing to talk about at our Finance Committee meeting, probably on Thursday, and then we'll be able to meet with them jointly next Wednesday.
Excellent, thank you. I don't have any other questions, so if there's no other board questions, if we have any public comment on the motion. Seeing none, any further board discussion? Seeing none, I'll say that I'm excited to recommend the budget to the Finance Committee and begin the process officially. I expect us to continue this collaborative approach that we've had and be as transparent as possible. I've told the superintendent over the last so many months that the purposefulness and the thoughtfulness of the way that he's presented his investments and the workshops that we've had leading up to this evening have really prepared the board in a way that, since I've been on the board, I've not felt has been part of our process. So I'm really proud of what we've done and what we've invested up to this point. I recognize that it has included some very long evenings from our staff and the board here. I'm looking here at that front row of some people that I cannot imagine the amount of hours that you guys have had to invest outside of your regular 9 to 5, so to speak, obligations. So I'm immensely proud of all the work that you guys have done and how well you've prepared us to send this document over to the Finance Committee. So I'm deeply, deeply thankful. We have a few more weeks of that hard work ahead of us, but I'm confident that it'll all pay off, because we're going to be building a much stronger district, and we're going to be delivering on the Portland Promise. So having said that, all those in favor of accepting the superintendent's FY20 budget and refer to the Finance Committee, please indicate. As it should be, it is unanimous with the students in favor. Thank you. All right. There are no personnel items this evening, and being it that it is before the hour of 10 p.m., is there any public comments on any items not on this evening's agenda? Yeah. It's before the hour of 9:30. All right, seeing none. Is there a motion to adjourn the business meeting? Ms. Trevorrow, second by Ms. Figdor. All those in favor, please indicate. Unanimous. Have a good evening. Thank you.